Again, welcome everyone to our service. And, we are in the middle of some really strange, if you will, times where a lot of things are going on that for many of us are very difficult to deal with and live with, and also leave us with questions of what is going on. What is God doing? Is God in the middle of all this? Are these things that He is ordaining, orchestrating, allowing? And as I've thought through how things have changed and what's going on, I decided to wear a specific jacket this morning. These colors remind me of my childhood because I am from Tampa Bay, which now Tampa Bay has being called Champa Bay, of course, because they just recently won the Super Bowl. And I have my Super Bowl 37 sweatshirt because they were the Super Bowl champions in 2003. And so I have this, but you notice the colors have changed. Tampa Bay's colors when I was a kid were this dark and bright orangey thing, but now they've gone to red. And although things have changed, there are certain things that are still the same when you think about Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay football, and they're still in Tampa Bay, and the focus is still on winning games and playing hard and all of that. And when we think of what's going on in our society, we want to believe that things have changed drastically. And really, things really haven't changed. There have always been problems and things that the Bible clearly addresses and talks about, which we will get into. But I'm reminded this morning of my aunt, my late aunt, Aunt Elaine. Auntie Elaine is what we called her. And when I was a little kid, I couldn't say Elaine, so I would say Elaine, and so that was her name to me. And she passed away a few years ago. She was a godly woman, very conservative. I never saw her wear pants, and we couldn't play cards, and we went over to her house as kids. But she loved the Lord, but she would give you the business. She was a very serious woman. And I would remember her talking as if the Lord's return was like tomorrow, right? Even when I was a little kid. So for decades, she would talk about the Lord's return as if it was something happening tomorrow. And what I realized is for her, in her perspective, things could not get any worse. And it seemed that they were, but honestly, there's this repeated pattern of activity in the world that goes on. And it's cyclical in nature, but it's also a progression, maybe not of things getting worse, but our eyes getting open to more of the fact that this is not our home and that our final home is in heaven for those of us who trust the Lord and know Him as our Savior. So, I wonder often, what would she say if she was living in this day and age with the coronavirus and the extreme focus on the racial injustice and all these things that are going on and things politically. And I wonder what she would say of how God is working out His purposes today. That's a phrase that I hear my mom saying a lot. God's working out His purposes. I wonder what she would say about that. And again, these things that we are seeing, and we'll unpack these things this morning, they're nothing new. They're nothing new. And so what does the Bible have to say about these things? And let me read this to you as I was studying Micah and studying how to teach and present this morning. Here is what came to mind. In the midst of immoral and unjust times, God has always used people to speak out and fight for justice and for righteousness. So, and many times what we see is there are people that God has used that really aren't the major voice. They're not the ones that you actually may even want to first remember. Think about the Bible. There are major players, if you will, characters that truly come to mind when you think of an overview of the scriptures. Many times we wouldn't think of the minor prophets when we think of that. So what I want to do this morning, we are smack dab in the middle of February. February is a month that we have designated to honor African Americans and to remember African American history, Black History Month. And you may say to yourself, why do we even need to have a Black History Month? And let me read this because I want to read it specifically so that we can engage and think about this. Because of sin and injustice, the majority of Black life and legacy has been whitewashed out of our history books. That's the reason why we have Black History Month. But as we know, God would use people and has used people in history and let's go back as our minds may take us a lot of times to the civil rights movement. And even before, we know that there was injustice, but injustice was really being publicly displayed and spoken out against during the civil rights movement. And so let me just name some people to you that you may have never heard their names, but they were instrumental in the civil rights movement. Claudette Colvin is one. She was a civil rights icon who was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger 9 months before Rosa Parks. But you may have never heard her name. But she was important in the movement and in the fight for injustice, the fight for justice and righteousness. How about Dion Diamond? He was a student activist from Howard University who was an early counter-protester and made it his point to crash segregated society. So he would literally go into spaces and areas that were predominantly white, and he would crash those in an effort to say and to show that we have to do different. We have to do better. This is not working. Jonathan Daniels is another one. He was an Episcopal seminarian and civil rights activist who was murdered by a county deputy as he shielded a 17-year-old civil rights activist during a peaceful protest. When I say peaceful protest, you may think, and I do, I think about what's been going on in the last few years. And even in the midst of peaceful protest, we have injustice, and that shouldn't be. Branch Rickey. He was a baseball player turned sports executive and became a pioneer in ending sports segregation in 1945. And in fact, here's a name that you would know. He signed Jackie Robinson to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers and breaking Major League Baseball's long-standing race barrier. So these people are very important, but they're not the major voices that you would think of. And when we look at the scriptures, there are also these minor voices who had this major message. Okay? And so when we look at the book of Micah, he was one of the minor prophets. And we will define, as we've been pretty much every week, what a prophet is. But Micah was a prophet who lived in an area far from the city center of government. And God called him to deliver his message at a time when the nation was led by people who were immoral, they were unjust, and they were ungodly. And it was not just the government leaders, but it was actually leaders in the church, the clergy. They were ungodly as well. And then when we read through the book of Micah, we see this overarching theme of judgment and hope. Judgment and hope. We can also kind of say that we can compare that to and represent judgment and hope as goodness and mercy. When I think of goodness and mercy, my mind goes to the 23rd Psalm, the end. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life, and you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's the point of this? The point of this is that God's goodness through his judgment, that's how we see God's goodness, through his judgment. Because he is a just God, he will have to, and he does judge sin. That's the goodness of God. But then we see the mercy of God. We see the hope, because on the other side, we see that he is granting pardon or a way of escape for those who trust and obey his way. Even though they don't deserve it, they haven't earned it, but he's saying, you know what? Because of my mercy, I am giving you hope. Hope in a future with me if you trust and obey. So because of these things that I saw as an overarching theme continuing through the book of Micah, I've entitled the sermon, The Goodness and Mercy of God. And let's just pause there for a second. The goodness and mercy of God. When you look around at the things in this world, you would think to yourself, there's nothing good in this world. And to be honest, the Bible supports that. There's nothing good here for us. But the goodness comes from honoring, understanding, and embracing what God has done and taught us and told us through his word. And we know that his mercy follows along with that. So as we lay out the book of Micah, what we need to understand is that there's this divided kingdom of Israel. There's the northern kingdom of Israel with the city center of Samaria, and focus on that city center. And then there's the southern kingdom of Judah with the city center of Jerusalem. Now, this is important to note, these city centers, because what we are seeing and have consistently seen is God's activity and the activity of man centers and really explodes from city centers, from these major metropolis city centers. It's interesting that God would use someone from a really minor, obscure city, place, village, to speak truth and to cause change. And it sounds a lot like Jesus. We know that Jesus came from a very obscure town, Bethlehem, Ephrathah. And that obscure little town is where our Messiah comes from. So there is a correlation there. But listen to these statistics. According to the United Nations, presently 55% of people live in concentrated urban areas worldwide. It is projected to be 68% by 2050. Now just noodle on that a little bit. So we're really streaming towards people coming into the densely populated urban city centers. And that's one of the reasons why Blueprint Church was strategically planted in the urban city center of Atlanta. And if you've been around any time, you've heard this said from our pastor, from Dahadi. He said that he wants to be the last generation who has to leave the urban context for sound discipleship. So we have the context of being urban, of being, whatever urban is to you. But should we have to leave that context to have sound discipleship? No. So we have to figure out as a church and as people of God how to contextualize what God has given us to reach the people where they are. All right, so back to Micah. Micah lived in this small town, as we said, that was in the southern kingdom called Maresheth. And it was about the same time as Isaiah. So we've got these two men of God that God's using to proclaim truth and to give us a vision and insight into what's going on. Both areas and people, north and south, in the influential city centers were violating their covenant with God, with the God of Israel. They were violating. They were completely not living as they should. And as I already said, this was not just the ruling, governing authorities in government, but it was actually also the priest who were not living right. They were living foul, and God had a mandate against them. So we will start with Micah's words as he is telling the people of the impending doom. When I hear those terms, impending doom, I literally am like, I got to look out because it's coming. The destruction is coming. Micah 3:8 says, "As for me, however, I am filled with power by the Spirit of the Lord." So he is declaring where this is coming from, where the strength, where the help, where the unction to do what's right is coming from. It's coming from the Spirit of the Lord. "With justice and courage to proclaim to Jacob his rebellion and to Israel his sin." So he's like, listen, y'all are living foul. It has reached the ears and the eyes of God, and he is sending me to speak out against what you are doing. The rebellion was so great that God was like, I can't just sit back and not say anything or not use one of my messengers to do something. The accusations and warnings show us this repeated pattern as we look through the minor prophets. We clearly see it here. The people are called to repent and return. They're sinning, they're living foul, and they are told, repent, change your mind about what you're doing, return. Now, different activity. And then God promised to do two things, to renew and to restore. Remember, God had a covenant with his people. A covenant is a binding agreement that God made with his people. And so God says, if you do these two things, if you repent and return, then I will renew and restore what the locusts have taken and what has been destroyed. So, what we see in the book of Micah is God appears in the first two chapters to judge Israel for over 500 years of disobedience and dishonoring of the Lord. Rebellion, literally naming the towns and who were guilty, and the list was far and wide. We're not talking about these isolated pockets of people living foul and doing wrong. We're talking about far and wide list of people who are not doing right. So how does this happen? How did they get there? How did we get to where we are? Because I would say if you look at America and what's taking place, although it seems like things just keep on escalating, and certain things are, but none of this is new. There's nothing new under the sun. The sin that we are seeing is some of the same sin that we saw as we read the scriptures. Well, the problem is the leadership. The leaders and the prophets, the government leaders and the prophets were not leading and ministering with integrity. Again, the concern of sin and injustice stemming from the leaders. John Maxwell, who was a leadership guru, coined this phrase: everything rises and falls on leadership. So if we want to look at why a family, why a church, why a government, why a nation is jacked up, look at the leadership and how are they leading? What are they doing? What are they speaking out against? And what are they speaking out for? So what was really going on, and how did the leaders and the prophets, the priests, how were they sinning? What was taking place that was so egregious that God said, I got to send my man to speak to the people about their nonsense? Here are some very specific things that were going on, and I want you to think about where we are right now in the 21st century and how these things are very much there. Bribery. Leaders leading with the mindset of bribery. If I don't get what I want, I can buy my way out. Justice favoring the rich. So if you've got money and influence and power, guess what? We're going to favor you. So justice for you, but not justice for the one that doesn't have those things. The poor are deprived of land, security, and hope. I don't even need to explain that. It makes complete sense, and we absolutely see that in our day and age. Sexual immorality of every kind. It's like, what is the flavor of the week? And I'm not saying that in a very trite and a playful way, but I'm saying there's so many things that are included in sexual immorality. From what we do, from what we see, from what we say, from what we're looking at, all of those things are involved in sexual immorality. What we are lusting after, things that we desire that cannot righteously be fulfilled. How about idolatry? Wanting what you can't have and idolizing it and putting it up on a pedestal to where it becomes a god for you. We've got that going on in our culture, in our day and age. Material greed. You know, you've maybe not heard this exact saying, but it's, you get all you can and you can all you get. So you get it, you bottle it up, and you keep it. That's material greed. How about this? Self-serving pride. Literally self-serving. It's all for me. It's whatever I can do. Leading with a heavy hand. Literally forcing people to do what you want them to do. And at the end of all of this, the one word that comes to mind that literally can sum up all of this is the word pride. Pride. And what does the Bible say? That pride comes before destruction. Not the fall. We want to kind of sugarcoat it, but it's destruction. So Micah says, and Micah addresses all of this with these three oracles, if you will. Now, this is not a verse by verse study of Micah. This is an overview. We've only got a few minutes, so we can't give you a every detail, but we're giving you an overview. So what is an oracle? An oracle is when a priest, acting as a medium or as the intercessor through whom God would advise people and God would speak to the prophet and share his heart. So let me read this. A priest acting as a medium through whom advice or prophecy was sought from God. So it's the direct channel from God to the prophet, and then he would declare. So that's the oracle. Now, this was the job of the prophet. And earlier in our teaching this morning, I told you I would define for you what a prophet is. So I want you to, if you've never heard this definition, which you probably have, this would be a very, very succinct and very good definition of a prophet. A prophet was one who would foretell the future as declared by God. So when you read the prophets, you are consistently hearing this message of thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord. Not thus saith Micah, not thus saith Nahum, not thus saith Jonah, but literally thus saith the Lord. So the Lord spoke and they wrote it down and penned it. And we see in 1 Peter that there is this correlation where the Bible says, I think it's 1 Peter 1:21 or 2 Peter 1:21, where it says no prophecy, no foretelling of the future as declared by God was ever given by an act of man, but it was actually God speaking with and declaring to his people what he wanted them to do. So as they were penning the scriptures, they were moved by God. And it's the same word picture and the same idea as a ship that is on a sea in a turbulent situation, that the ship might want to go there, but the ship can't, because literally the sea is directing the path. That's the idea of what the prophets were doing. As they were penning the scriptures, according to 2 Peter 1:21, God was guiding them to make sure that they were declaring his truth. Okay? So, 3 oracles. The first oracle was judgment against the nations, Israel and Judah, and the hope of deliverance from captivity. You see those two? You see the judgment and the hope, the goodness and the mercy. That's Micah chapter 1 through the middle of chapter 2. Then the second oracle is the prophet's indictment, or the prophet's speaking out against the leaders of Israel and Judah's future glory. And that's Micah 3:1 through the middle of chapter 5. So we have literally judgment and hope. We have shame on you leaders, shame on you prophets, shame on you priests from the prophet. And then now we have in this third oracle, God's lawsuit with Israel and the ultimate triumph of the kingdom of God. So God's going to deal with it. At the end of this whole thing, God is going to deal with us. And I'm telling you, when we take this and kind of look at it, all right, how does this speak to where I am and what I'm doing right now, what we're doing and living in our world right now? God will deal with and will have the final say in what is taking place. And the victory is his, and to the kingdom that if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, that you are a part of. So the message of judgment and hope that he offers is extremely clear. It's not hide and go seek and trying to make you find it. It's clear. So this was a mandate to all. It was not, and this is where we need to really encapsulate all of this and take this in. This was not, what I'm about to read to you, was not just a thing of, listen, leaders, government leaders, priests, listen to me. This is what I want from you. Yes, they are the leadership and things rise and fall on them, but this mandate that I'm about to read was given to all of mankind. Okay? This is Micah 6:8, and if you know the book of Micah, you probably know this verse. Micah 6:8 says, mankind, all of you, everybody, he has told each of you what is good and what it is the Lord requires of you. So now we're going to get the list. So he's framing it. He's told you. Now I'm going to tell you. He says to act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. So what does that mean? What are those three? Let me read it again. Mankind, he has told you, each of you, what is good and what it is the Lord requires of you. To act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. To act justly means to treat others fairly. To treat others fairly. I have heard people say, why do we have to have Black History Month? This is not fair. We need a History Month for this. There's not a White History Month. Well, last I knew, most of our American history books have left out some very key and important things, good and bad, in regards to Black history. So let's be just, let's be fair, and it's not just Black history that's been whitewashed out of the history books, but it's a lot of minority history. And so we know that if you don't remember, you're prone to repeat. So we have to remember what's taken place, but we have to be fair and just. Treat others fairly. Then Micah says to love faithfulness. Some of your Bibles may say to love mercy. And what does that mean? Is to embrace a heart of compassion. To embrace a heart of looking at people for who God created them to be and loving them right where they are. compassion. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, church, the world knows what we're against, but they don't know what we are for. Because we've done a great job framing, all right, let's write our statement of why we are against XYZ. But I think it would be more prudent and more effective, possibly, if we were to frame out, what are we for? What do we stand up with and stand and allows us to live a life that's approved by God? So that's the first two. The third one is to walk humbly with God. You remember when I was listing those groups of sins, those things that were going on with the people in both the northern and southern kingdoms stemming from the city center? The last thing that I said was pride was at the heart of all these. Well, the opposite of pride is humility. So what does it mean to walk humbly with God? It's to live suppressing pride under the authority of God. Because you can try and suppress pride with what others are saying and others are saying you're too prideful, so go sit down. But until you walk under the authority of God and understand that, no, I need to go sit down because I'm not God. I don't need to operate according to what I feel, but I need to operate according to what God has instructed me according to his word. Then that's how you walk humbly with God. So let me end with this, okay? The major message that we started with of this sermon was, in the midst of immoral and unjust times, God has always used people to speak out and fight for justice and righteousness. So Micah can be described, if you will, as we kind of frame this and really deliver this in a nice little package. Micah can be described as the voice of the Holy Spirit that gave a warning to the people of Israel. Now, as believers, let's put it to us now. Let's fight for righteousness. Fight for righteousness and allow God to use us to speak out against sin and injustice. That's what Micah was doing. He allowed God to use him to speak out against the sin that was taking place. One of the best ways to speak out against the sin that's taking place is to fight for righteousness and to speak to truth and to speak the truth. Listen to James' words as he addresses the believers as we end this morning. James 4:4 says, "You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? So whoever wants to be the friend of the world becomes the enemy of God." So let us not, believers, church, let us not be complicit by doing and saying nothing. Complicit means that you got some fault and some blame because you've decided, I'm just going to be quiet. Now, I'm not saying, listen to me and hear me well. I am not saying that every single thing that takes place, you make it your hobby horse, you jump on it and you speak out against it. What I am saying is live and speak the truth. Declare righteousness. And when you declare righteousness, you are speaking out against injustice. Again, that's the whole comparison of the world seeing what we are for and not just hearing what we're against. So, I will end with this, church. Let's be proactive by living righteously and speaking out against injustice. Amen?
Thanks for worshiping with us. For more information about Blueprint Church, visit us online at blueprintchurch.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Blueprint Church. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.